are met with cruelty and confusion. In the face of this suffering, all GOP members of this committee can manage to do is shout at immigrants as if they aren't people. And then there is a crisis of logic. MAGA Republicans, but also some Democrats, want to pretend that a lack of enforcement is the problem, even though this administration has doubled the number of deportations between fiscal years 2022 and 2023, and even deported 18,000 families in that time frame. So unsurprisingly, this hasn't solved any of the underlying problems, but some folks seem to believe that if we double down on our failed policies of the past, somehow these problems will go away, but nothing could be further from the truth. The truth is that we will undermine our immigration system and make all the existing problems worse if we repeat the mistakes of the past. Failing to end our dangerous policies that fuel chaos abroad will only guarantee more people being forced to flee their homes and countries. Right now, Congress and the administration are signaling they are willing to use immigrant communities as bargaining chips for more war and more weapons. However, raising the credible fear standard and imposing violent enforcement policies like mass family separation and summary deportation would destroy our asylum system for a generation, would violate our obligations under international law, and ensure more chaos in the immigration system. The damage caused by this chaos and inhumanity is personal for me and my constituents. My office has seen a significant increase in immigration cases in the recent months. Each one shows the human dimension of this issue. A family fleeing the horrific violence in Sudan, a mother who can't take care of her ill child, a woman with cancer whose family members can't visit her, a doctor whose fiance can't live with her, a young man whose wife died and whose family members couldn't attend her funeral. Endless wait times for family members fleeing violence and persecution in Haiti and Gaza and elsewhere. We are doing the best we can as an office to help our constituents in St. Louis and their families face these crushing obstacles, but ultimately, Congress must act. Congress must legislate. We know what the solution is: building a just and humane immigration system and addressing the root causes of migration. That looks like expanding lawful pathways, using parole authority, increasing asylum case processing capacity, securing our authorization for folks who are already here, protecting our dreamers, ensuring that states and cities have the resources they need to process new arrivals, and ending support for war, blockade, sanctions, and other policies that disproportionately harm civilians. But instead of supporting real solutions we know will work, MAGA Republicans want to demonize and scapegoat our immigrants for short-term political gain. So let's be clear. Giving in to the extreme demands of Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans is what will undermine our immigration system. Rejecting our obligations under the Refugee Convention will undermine our immigration system. Cruelty will undermine our immigration system and our own humanity. The real crisis is failing to act and substituting cruelty as a meaningful policy solution. We must not surrender to this failed policy approach. We must stand with the people, all of humanity, and with a fair and humane approach to immigration and foreign policy. That is what St. Louis and I will continue to push for. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Mr. Fallon from Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's talk about facts and reality and less about, let's say, word vomit and drivel. Here's a quote. "Border is no less secure than before Biden took office." Who said that? Alejandro Mayorkas, the Homeland Security Secretary, said that under oath in front of this Congress. So let's look at some indisputable data. In the first 34 months of the Trump administration, there were 1.6 million illegal encounters. Same time frame, Biden administration, 8 million. No less secure than before Biden took office. That's interesting. In our history, we had two outlier months, 25 years ago, nearly, where we had 200,000 illegal border crossings in a month. Hadn't happened in almost a quarter century. It has happened 20 times under Joe Biden's watch. We had, in the last 2 years of the Trump administration, I believe it was 6 folks that were on the terrorist watch list. In the last 2 years, 6 total. Last year, 169. The number of Russian nationals crossing our southern border has exploded. Same with Chinese nationals. Look at the MO of what the Russians did in Ukraine. They put folks into Ukraine, and then some of them were saboteurs. It doesn't need to be a large percentage. Chinese nationals a few years ago, prior to Joe Biden, there were 323 Chinese nationals that crossed the southern border. Last year was 24,000. If they happen to invade Taiwan, what if just 1% of those folks are saboteurs? Opioid deaths have doubled. Mexican drug cartel profits are at record highs. And last month was the worst month of illegal encounters, cracked 300,000. Interesting to note that in FY 2017, for the entire year, it was just north of 300,000. Let's talk about the migrants themselves. Estimates are that 30% of the women that cross all the way through southern Mexico to our frontier are raped or sexually assaulted along the journey. Countless numbers of migrants are shaken down by the cartels, and hundreds die. Any fair-minded person believe that the border's no less secure than under prior administrations? 300,000 last month. The largest city I represent is Plano, Texas, population 300,000. 39 states don't have a population of 9 million, and yet that's what we're nearing as far as illegal encounters go. We used to have wait in Mexico, and now we have mass parole. We used to have build walls. Now we have open gates. We used to have criminal deportations. Now we have American vacations paid for by the American taxpayer, laundered through the NGOs. We used to have Americans. We used to put American security first, and now we see record cartel profits. We are a debtor nation, $34 trillion in the hole. And the liberal fallacy and fantasy that somehow this is a net financial positive for this country is just that. It's patently absurd. It's about a $155 billion loss when you factor in we're educating foreign nationals, the medical care that's required, and the unfortunate criminal element. Again, it doesn't need to be a large percentage that largely prey on their own people. The border is de facto open. It's unchecked. It's unguarded. I was in the Del Rio sector just a few weeks ago. There's supposed to be 180 agents on the line at any given time. There were 0 for days because the cartels use surge tactics where they tell these 3,000 or 4,000 migrants, cross right here. And then there's scores of miles, hundreds of miles of border that's completely unguarded. And it's a lot easier to smuggle your illegal narcotics when there's nobody stopping you. So when you have these liberals that virtue signal about, we're a sanctuary state, we're a sanctuary city, okay, then you house these folks in your states and in your cities, and for those folks out there that believe the Biden administration's policies of immigration, and the folks here on this panel, in this committee hearing, then you put them in your homes instead of being limousine liberals that it's somebody else's problem. Eric Adams, the Democratic mayor of New York, said that it's going to destroy New York City. So by some people's definition on this committee, that's a racist comment. He also said that of the 110,000 illegal migrants in the city at the time of this quote, it would cost New York $12 billion. Well, by that math, it's going to cost Texas, my state, $250 billion. But that's okay if it's Texas. So you can either address this problem or pretend it doesn't exist by keeping your heads in the collective woke sand. And if you don't address it, you're going to rue the day you didn't, because you saw folks like Tony Gonzalez, Monica de la Cruz, Mayra Flores being elected because the folks, the Hispanic Americans along the southern border, are sick and tired of the cartels, the crime, the corruption, and the chaos, and they're leaving the Democratic Party in droves. You will rue the day when you lose the election in November of next year. I yield.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Christian Morthy from Illinois. Forgive me. Forgive me. Ms. Crockett from Texas.
Thank you so much. Texas on top of Texas. Very interesting. My colleague just mentioned that we should talk about facts instead of fallacy. So I do want to make sure that we address a couple of facts, starting with the fact that Republicans claim to be pro-life, but they're anything but. Considering the fact that we just had a woman and her 2 children that died, they drowned in the state of Texas because our governor decided that federal authorities should not be allowed to actually try to save those people.
Order, Mr. Chairman, could you instruct the member to not use profanity to interrupt other members?
And can we not keep running down my time?
We'll hold your time. You'll get it back. Remind members to have decorum during the hearing today. Ms. Crockett, you may continue. Please restore 10 seconds to her time.
The fact is, these people died at our border in Texas on Friday. We are here today having a hearing, and the pro-life party does not want to talk about the fact that there was basically state-issued or sanctioned death at the Texas border. There can be nothing more inhumane than the fact that we have not even decided that we were going to discuss this on the pro-life side. But you know what? I do want to talk about some other facts that we have. Republicans can't do the basic job that we are supposed to do. You see, in 2 days, we are scheduled to shut down. They can't figure out how to do a budget because we're 6 months behind, but somehow they are going to solve this complex issue of immigration. I seriously doubt it. And to quote a great known as Riri, also known as Rihanna, how about we give a round of applause, a standing ovation, because we have absolutely had nothing more than performative politics. In fact, my Texas colleague just finished his comments by specifically talking about the election in November and who's going to win it. We are not here to campaign. We are supposed to be here to legislate, but we have done everything except for legislate. So let's go through a few more facts. Democrats have introduced legitimate, sensible legislation to address what we're seeing. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to grandstand for political purposes rather than work with Democrats and fix an immigration system that has been broken for decades. Republicans continue to vilify people, including mothers and their children. And as I just said, we just lost a mother and her children. We also know that the gentle lady from Florida, who happens to be the only member to give birth this session, specifically admitted that she actually wants a child separation policy. I can't think of something more ironic than that particular member specifically advocating for child separation policies. Republicans are yelling that states don't have the tools to help with migrants, but rather than work with Democrats, Republicans are targeting communities of color in Democratic cities like Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia. And while they say that it's about Democrat-run cities, I do want to point out another similarity that they have. These are cities that are run by African Americans. So while I know that they love to pretend as if there are no racial undertones, it is just striking to me that we specifically are going after African American run cities. And we talk about the mayor of New York. I don't know when I've ever seen so much bipartisanship and agreement out of the Republicans, but they continue to talk about what the mayor of New York has said. Let me tell you about somebody else who wanted to speak out about New York, and I want to make sure that she understands that the Democrats aren't the problem, but the Republicans are, and that's Cardi B. Cardi B specifically talked about her frustration because the mayor came out and said that they don't have the resources that they need. But guess who has actually tried to give the resources to these cities and who has stood in obstruction? President Biden. To be clear, President Biden has tried to give state and local governments and nonprofits federal resources to support temporary food, shelter, and other services, but MAGA House Republicans are refusing to give those cities and states those resources. President Biden has tried to put 1,300 more Border Patrol agents at the border to help, but Republicans have obstructed that request. Republicans want to cut the flow of fentanyl coming into the United States. President Biden has tried to give our border agents 100 new cutting-edge inspection devices and add 1,000 additional law enforcement personnel. Republicans obstructed that request. Honestly, I can't tell if y'all are for anything other than obstruction and cruelty. Just take a look at my governor last week. He said, and I quote, "The only thing we're not doing is we're not shooting people who come across the border because, of course, the Biden administration would charge us with murder." I know Governor Abbott doesn't understand the law, but let me say this, that absolutely would be murder. And with that, I'll yield.
Gentlelady yields back.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like unanimous consent to submit this article. The Biden administration admits migrant drownings occurred before Border Patrol alerted Texas officials.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I serve on the Homeland Security Committee, And we have been working very hard on an investigation into Secretary Mayorkas and his failures and willfulness to break our United States federal laws in regards to the border. Just a few months ago, two of my own constituents, Jose and Isabel Lerma, were killed in a human smuggling pursuit. A 17-year-old illegal alien, likely working for the cartels, drove illegal aliens across the border, hit them head on. This lovely American couple from my district was killed on their way to visit family. We have Americans dying every single day, and all I hear from Democrats every time we talk about the border is they're worried about migrant rights. They claim they're concerned about children and women, and then they claim, in spite of all the evidence, in spite of the fact that over 10 million illegal aliens have crossed our border, in spite of the fact 1.9 million people, illegal aliens, are in our country, gotaways. We don't know who they are. We don't know where they are. We don't know what they're doing. And in spite of the fact that over 300 Americans are dying every single day from fentanyl overdose, the numbers don't lie, but the Democrats do. Now, this is interesting to me. Sitting in here earlier, I was listening to the discussion on jobs, and that the whole reason claimed by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle is that they want to bring in as many illegal aliens as possible, give them amnesty so they can fill jobs in America. And then they talked about that we have a population growth problem in the United States. They were talking about the real issue of it being the lowest population growth and why this is a problem. Well, I think we can all say that if maybe, perhaps, 63 million people weren't murdered in the womb, we wouldn't have a population growth problem, would we? That's not women's reproductive rights. That's called abortion. It's called murder. And that's led to, yeah, a population growth in America. But Democrats claim that we've got to replace Americans with illegal aliens to fill jobs. That's their solution. That's their solution. And take away jobs from Americans. That's their solution. The Biden administration is guilty of the largest human trafficking operation in history. This is human trafficking. I just traveled in airports across the country just the past few days. You know what I saw in our airports? Migrants, illegal aliens, all over in the airports. You know who's paying for them to travel? United States taxpayers paying for them to travel. We're so sick of this. Everybody's sick of it. Oh, but children in cages, is that what we want to talk about? Crying over children in cages. But yet the Biden administration has lost, Mr. Homan, how many children have they lost?
Nearly 100,000.
Nearly 100,000. But they have accused you and former President Trump and the previous administration of all kinds of horrific things. How do you feel about that?
It's ridiculous. Look, I testified earlier, illegal immigration was down 83% towards the end of the Trump administration because of all the policies we put in place. When 83% less people coming, how many women aren't being raped? How many children aren't dying on the border? How many Americans aren't dying from fentanyl overdose because the Border Patrol's on the line seizing more fentanyl? How many women weren't sex trafficked? How many billions of dollars did cartels not make? President Trump's policies saved lives, saved lives. The wall saved lives. Why? Because the most vulnerable, the families and